Hi everyone, it's Lauren. It's July, it's halfway, well more than halfway through the year now. It's summer in the Northern Hemisphere at least, although you would not know that to look outside my window right now. And I thought this would be a really good time to take a breather and look back on some of the best things that I've read in the first half of the year. Now I did this last year. I did a top 5 I think of 2015 so far, and then I did another best reads video at the end of the year, and a lot of the books that I'd mentioned halfway through the year didn't make it to my end of year video, and I'd actually changed my mind about quite a lot of them. So I didn't want to talk about too many books in this video because I think the thing with reading is when you've just finished something you might give it a star rating, but really it takes some hindsight and it takes some time for you to realise which of those books are really going to stay with you for the long term. But it's good to talk about books that we like. That's why I'm here, to talk about literature that I really love. So I have 5 books that I've read in the first half of the year that I really enjoyed, and they're not a top 5, it's just 5 that I happen to look back on and want to talk about again, and these are in no particular order of preference. And I tell you what, this has been the year of the short story collection for me, definitely, and the first one of those that I have is No One Belongs Here More Than You, which is a short story collection by Miranda July. Miranda July is a journalist, a writer, a filmmaker, and if you've seen any of her work you'll know that it's very distinct, it's quite quirky and offbeat, and her short story collections are no exception to this. From my memory, most of these stories follow a singular character in modern day America, sort of struggling with modern day life. A lot of them are quite abstract, some of them are almost magical realism-y, but not to the point where actual fantastical magical events are happening, but to the extent that some of what's going on is just so odd that you can't quite buy it, but it's presented in such a normal, naturalistic way. The themes that I felt ran through these stories were ideas of belonging, struggling with social conventions and how to connect with other people, and the feeling that you're very different and you're standing out, and also dealing with things like loneliness. The second short story collection that I really loved was Multitudes by Lucy Caldwell. All of these stories are centred around people living and growing up in Belfast in sort of the 80s and 90s. And most of the stories deal with a loss of innocence in some way. So the characters in here are all different ages. The majority of the stories focus on those early awkward teenage years between the ages of perhaps 11, 12 up to 16. And the loss of naivety which each of these characters suffer comes in various forms of severity. So some of them all the way up to being in quite dangerous, vulnerable situations or having to deal with some form of loss, down to just toying with boundaries or realising that certain people aren't who you thought they were. And I felt like Lucy Caldwell really captured the pain of being that age and your angst and your anxiety and not knowing yourself and not really knowing how to fit in with others and relate to others. And I thought it was just such a wonderful collection. I really enjoyed the writing. The writing itself was beautiful, but the way that she created and crafted her characters I thought was just wonderful. The next book I want to talk about is one that at the time I struggled with reading and I wasn't really sure about, but it is one that's really stayed with me, and that's The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston. The reason I struggled with this book is because I wasn't sure if it was a memoir or if it was fiction. What was true, she really blurred the lines and uses a lot of magical realism. Essentially, it is a look back at her life as a first-generation Chinese immigrant in the US, and also at her mother's life of that immigration process, and it handles themes of feeling different, feeling isolated, growing up where your family has a different culture to the society that you're living in. Also, it looks at women's place in society, how Chinese culture views women and daughters within families as opposed to Western US culture. But the way that she explores this isn't just by telling you what Chinese culture is like. She uses Chinese storytelling techniques, I guess, and weaves Chinese myths and legends into her own stories. So you really feel a part of it and you're getting that alternative view on the world. And that's where it feels like the boundaries between fact and fiction are getting blurred. But on reflection, I feel like that worked really well, and I'm very interested to read more of Maxine Hong Kingston's work. I think she goes through her life throughout her books. I was going to say novels, but they're not really novels. So I want to read the next stage in her life now, because this one finished, I think, when she was about 16. Moving on to some non-fiction, I have been raving about this book a lot, so there is no surprise that Girls Will Be Girls by Emma O'Toole is on my list of favourite books that I have read so far this year. This book is a look at gender primarily about women, and it is a feminist book, but it looks at gender for all people and how all of us are limited by the kind of binary idea of masculinity and femininity. And the main crux of her argument is that these displays of masculinity or femininity are performances that all of us do. They're all gestures or ways to act, ways to speak, ways that we dress that we have learnt from being children in order to align ourselves to a group, in order to say, I am a woman and therefore I wear heels and I walk like this, or whatever. And she really explores how difficult it is when individuals go against their prescribed gender norms, and how difficult it is to break out of these moulds that society sets for us. But I thought her writing was so accessible, so wonderful, really funny. She argues her point so well, and I just loved it. I just loved it. And finally, another book of short stories, which is Sweet Home by Caris Bray. These stories I thought were so beautiful. What I really loved about this collection is that each story felt very, very differently. They're told from different points of view. Some of them are set in odd dystopian worlds, and some of them are set very obviously now. But each of them are about family, about domesticity, about the pain of raising children. There's a story at the beginning where a mother is talking to her young daughter, and her daughter's remembering a time where her mother shouted at her, which upset her, which her mum can't remember. And it's things like that, the pain that children put you through as a parent. But there's also themes of loss in here in general, such as families having children who are then ill, or having children and then losing them. And it's just how painful that kind of familial love can be. And I thought it was so beautiful, so affecting, and so simple. And yet, as a collection, I feel like it was so masterfully and skillfully done, and I just have no bad things to say about any of the stories in here. So that's apparently what I think in the first half of the year. It'll be interesting to see at the end of the year what I think, if these books are still at the top of my best read list. I almost hope that they're not, because then that means that I'll be reading lots of other fantastic things in the coming months. But I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment if you have read any of these, or you want to discuss them, or you want to read any of these, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! From authors whose previous work I have enjoyed and want to read more of. I've got a couple of authors whose books I didn't enjoy that much, but I want to give them another go. And the first one is Kazuo Ishiguro, and I read Never Let Me Go years ago and just hated it.